Good evening viewers and welcome to the Art with World. I am your host WAHEED. Today we are going to have a very interesting discussion on two cultures of arts and science. They have different perspectives, different worldview. We will discuss on all these things with our very esteemed guest Dr. KHURSHID HASNAIN. Thank you Dr. Saab for coming to our program. Dr. KHURSHID is currently advisor to OIC, Committee on Science and Technology, and prior to that he was Dean of Natural Sciences at Quaid-e-Azam University. He also served there as Chairman of Physics Department and as a Professor of Physics, and he also held chair as Distinguished Scientist at National Center for Physics. Dr. KHURSHID completed his PhD from Tufts University, Massachusetts, USA, and he did his postdoc various universities in the USA. He is also an accomplished poet. His book is Kinare Aapka Khwaab, and he has been writing short stories which has been published in various literary magazines. Currently he is working on his novel. This is his first novel which is at its last stages. How are you, Dr. Saab?
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me for this opportunity.
Before we discuss our subject today, we have a small report for our viewers. Viewers, please watch it.
In 1959, the eminent British scientist and science administrator C.P. Snow wrote a series of essay letters published under the title The Two Cultures and the Scientific Revolution. Snow's basic argument that triggered a vigorous discussion internationally was that in the contemporary age the intellectual life had been split into two cultures, that of the scientists and that of the arts and humanities intelligentsia, and that there was a vast communication gap between these two cultures. According to Snow, this vast gulf that separates the two creative communities makes their vision and creative efforts incomprehensible to each other, and as such was a serious impediment to solving the world's problems. In the contemporary and nearby futures, one example of the problems that require an intense engagement of intelligentsia from across the divide are issues related to security and freedom in the cyberspace. Indeed, the entire notion of a human being as a unique and central entity is under question as intelligent machines take over much of the analytic and creative role previously confined to human beings. It is apparent that as a society, it is profoundly and often irreversibly transformed by technology. There needs to be a very intense and ongoing interaction between the two cultures to identify the social costs of technological transformations in their remedies. The notion of freedom indoctrination and useless consumption-driven growth and resulting environmental degradation can also be made a part of the broader discussion.
How are you, Dr. KHURSHID?
I'm fine, thank you.
You were just telling me that you were in the process of completing your novel. How is it going?
As you know, being a novelist yourself, it's a long journey, and it's so I'm coming towards the end now, and it's been almost a year and a half in the going. So anyway, it's a first time experience, so as you can imagine, it's a challenge.
There must be a lot of anxiety at this stage.
Yes, the effort to wrap up things and to closure for your characters and your the themes. So that's the very tough part. I mean, I've the previous parts, a lot of things get very spread out, and then you have to somehow condense them in the end to some meaningful end. So that's where I am.
We'll talk about all these things, but first let us just start the subject what we are having for discussion today. And that is huge difference between culture of arts and sciences, and including humanities. They have totally different perspectives. They're almost incomprehensible to each other, and that difference creates a lot of impact on how our social development takes place, and what our understanding about world and how social development they are interacting with each other. So I would refer to C.P. Snow's famous article which he wrote in last century, in which he pointed out these differences and emphasized to bridge this gap. What's your comment on that?
Certainly, as you said, these are in a sense, two worlds. I mean, we all belong to the same physical world, but the concerns of the scientist as opposed to the concerns of the artist are, of course, very different. There's no need to elaborate that. It's self-evident what the artist focuses on and what the scientist tries to fathom. The physical world versus the world of the human being, or the emotional world of the existential world of the human, the person. So obviously there are the languages, the discourse in the two becomes very different. Science has its own jargon and its own background, and you have to be comfortable with that, to be trained in that, in fact. And of course the artist has his own language or languages or techniques. You referred to the article, the essay by C.P. Snow. It was got the title of the two cultures debate. In fact, it was called. This was like 1959, so it's a fair a good many years ago. And so we have to remember that the context in which Snow was talking, and that was the post-war Second World War period, and it was the late 50s or early 60s in which the discussions. And obviously at that time Snow felt that the concept of the intellectual in the Western world was very much focused on the intellectuals on the side of literature or poetry or social sciences or history, etc. And the recognition of the scientist as an intellectual was somewhat missing. And combined with that, he felt that there was a very serious need for a communication between these two domains. And he felt that it was at that point in time, the scientists were talking to the scientists and the artists were talking to their own public or to their own, and the concerns of the one were not being appreciated by the other, and vice versa. So of course this debate went on for many years, and of course it took many turns and developments with time. We can discuss this also later as people who did bridge the gap between the communication gap between the two sides, and in fact made scientific knowledge or scientific changes comprehensible to the lay public. So I would say that what Snow raised as the issue certainly materialized in a sense that it led people to be aware of the need to communicate across the divide.
Well, keeping you in mind, I don't think it's very difficult to bridge the gap, because you are in arts as well, you are an accomplished poet, you are a scientist as well. So on a personal note, would you like to guide us, what's it that makes this rare combination in you and maybe many others? Maybe it's because of your family background. You come from a family where Maulana Altaf Hussain Hali, he was first Urdu critic and very great poet, and Khaja Ahmad Abbas, who was a fiction writer and a screenplay writer, very famous one. And during your student time, you were just telling me you had opportunity to meet people like Sibte Hassan. But how did you manage all this?
Absolutely. I mean, it's as you said, there are a lot of people in science who have an appreciation of art and culture. That's not something rare. I mean, there are many people I know of. But it is somewhat rare to have people who contribute creatively, you could say, or positively towards both domains. That is maybe in the sense unusual. And if I want to gauge myself as to how that becomes possible or why it became desirable for me as an individual to indulge in both these domains. I would say that obviously one is probably, as genetics people tell us, we are born with certain right, I mean abilities or tendencies or traits that certainly will play a role in how you appreciate this various things. But beyond that, I mean everything needs to be nurtured. You need to have an environment, you need to have some kind of an incentive to be indulging in a domain beyond your own domain. So I was probably very fortunate in that sense, and I think I owe a lot of that to my family atmosphere, where my father being himself a scientist, he was a botanist, one of the earliest generations of Pakistani scientists. So obviously science was something which was very much emphasized or recognized in our household as something which was in a sense the thing to be doing. But then he was also himself a very well versed in literature and poetry, I mean Persian as well as of course Urdu and English and spattering of German. So that of course atmosphere of books etc. in our house, and that appreciation, and we were sort of taught to appreciate poetry at a rather young age. But then as you mentioned, on my mother's side there were a lot of creative people in the arts, and some who were not as well known as the names that you took, but they were themselves novelists and people who wrote afsanas and short stories, and so that obviously gives you certain incentive to emulate them or to create yourself. So that thing probably by the time I went to class 9th or 10th, I had begun to try my hand at writing different things.
So would you share with us some formative experiences?
If I start from where I started writing, so this was probably around when I before my class 9th, you could say 15 years or so, I was only reading English literature or everything from comic books all the way up to Sherlock Holmes and towards then short stories by Maupassant or Somerset Maugham and O. Henry and things like that. I was doing all that while I was probably starting from class 6th or 7th up to. But then it was really in that stage in the high school, and I discovered Urdu poetry and Urdu literature, short stories, and that was the era of the early 70s. Okay. It was the era where social awakening in the country.
It was globally very radical.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, in the 60s, I was not then as much conscious, but I think by late 60s definitely. Yeah. The Vietnam War was a major thing.
Hippie movement.
Right. I mean, that was not something which drove me towards literature, but definitely the Vietnam War had a thing. And then the reading a lot of the Urdu literature, the progressive movement and its ideas definitely seeped in. I remember my earliest short story was very much in the tradition of the progressive writers things. So that was of course the ethos in which you could say one opened one's mind towards the developments. And then of course there was the 1970 elections, and then the war or the separation of East Pakistan. Yeah. That I think had that traumatic that experience, that was a very traumatic experience for anyone. I mean the suffering, the war, the losses, the deaths, etc. That's when I really began to do poetry at that point. Wrote different things. And that time I was now also entering the university in Karachi. And so I don't want to go on too long. Just stop me when you think I am taking too long. So, but the university, of course, then a entirely new era begins, and we can discuss that when you feel.
But do you think there are really differences in appreciation of reality, meaningfulness in life between science and arts?
Well, even as scientists, we exist on two planes, you could say. We deal with everyday life like everybody else does. We have to make our ends meet, and we have our children to look after, and we have our spouse, and we have all the material needs, the emotional needs of a human being. We could say the spiritual needs, some would say, etc., whatever, the social needs, and all these things. So in that sense, your sense of reality, your perception of reality is no different from that of anyone else, and that anyone else could also be, of course, a poet. In a very general way I'm talking about. And then, of course, as a scientist, you have a perception. Now I'm talking as a physicist. I really don't know how a biologist or chemist look at the, but a physicist tends to have a much more abstract, you're forced to look at things not just concretely in terms of calculating how fast this bullet will travel, or how fast this, if it's dropped from this height, where does it reach, and with what velocity. But as we go towards deeper into physics particularly, it becomes very much a game of imagination. There's simply things you cannot see. There's no way of seeing them, but you have to really build mental structures to deal with them. You have to find ways to determine how they will behave, objects that you can never perceive, and or situations that you are trying to formulate into a theory. They are just abstractions. They're abstractions which help you to get to reality. So that's that's the mental world in which a scientist works. It gets more concrete when you move towards chemistry, and as you move towards biology, it gets even more concrete, you could say, and slightly less abstract. But even now, the modern day biology is getting very abstract, if you go towards neuroscience, for example. And of course, the artist's reality, as you yourself are very competent to talk about that, is the reality of the human existence and its relation to others, other beings, and the universe. So I guess that's the sense in which they are very different.
How are they different?
In the sense that the scientist is dealing with a reality which, even though it looks very concrete, it has a lot of abstraction behind it, and it is the objects of his study are, you would say, matter without emotions, matter without desires, etc., matter without suffering, you could say. Okay, and on the other hand, you have the artist whose focus is a living entity which has desires and emotions and suffering and whatever you want to.
So this is a very interesting discussion we are having, but this is time for a short break. Please stay with us. Welcome back, viewers. Dr. Saab, it was very interesting discussion before our break time. You were talking about differences between scientists and artists or humanities persons, how differently they see the world. What I understand that artists generally do not have claim on reality. They talk in relative terms. They rely more on their imagination. Most of the fiction and poetry, there is some ambiguity left. There is no very straight kind of statements. Whereas science mostly talk about concrete facts. It doesn't want to have any ambiguity in its statements. But some recent developments, I won't say recent, I mean it has been many decades before, like development in science like quantum physics and relativity, they have changed kind of concreteness of the science. And sometime it looks like that they are also talking in some imaginative terms. The concepts like black holes, multi-universe, things like that, they have kind of brought science closer to arts and humanities as well. What's your take on that?
That's a very interesting, perspective, and certainly there's much truth in it. In the sense, let me go back a little bit, and of course, as you recall, in the early 20th century, writers like Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, etc., they started writing about science fiction. In a sense, they were imagining how science or technology would make different things possible, outer space travel, or Martians coming to Earth, and War of the Worlds from H.G. Wells, for example, and Jules Verne has many things, and for example the time travel in the case of Jules Verne, and things like that. And of course many of the things that they imagined, some of those things have become, of course, realities, like space travel and all those things. That's one for me, that's a fascinating aspect, that thing that we imagine as authors or writers, etc., in a time when they might seem very fantastic, do later on become realities. But beyond that, I've been coming back to your question and its spirit, as you pointed out, the science which was, let's say, in the post-Newtonian period, 17th century till the end of the 19th century, a period of a lot of developments in science, not only physics but also in biology. Genetics was discovered, and evolution, the theory of evolution, etc. So everything had a very deterministic and a concreteness about it. You starting from some fundamental things of a particle, its position and its velocity, and you go on to calculate or to determine where it's going to be 5 years from now, if you want to. So it was a deterministic. A particle was a particle, a wave was a wave, and that never the twain shall meet, kind of thing. And we thought of things as happening in a continuum. Motion is a continuum, energy is a continuum, so on and so forth. Matter is separate, energy is separate, things like that. So it was a very, a world of very sharp boundaries in terms of ideas and concepts. But by the end of the 19th century, as you mentioned yourself, the
20th century?
No, I mean the end of the 19th century is when quantum physics initiated, like 1900 exactly. The advent of quantum mechanics, and then relativity, and of course then go on to its application, general relativity and cosmology, things that you I think also mentioned, black holes and wormholes and etc., and the warping of space-time and all these things. Particularly quantum mechanics, as some of our viewers might know, has led to a lot of discarded the absolute or deterministic notions of Newtonian mechanics, so far as the dealing with the very microscopic world is concerned. So I mean, all our macroscopic world, of course, is constructed from the microscopic objects and things. So I think it was probably Niels Bohr who made this very statement, something, I don't have the exact words, but something close to this, that all the things that we think are real are composed of actually things which are very unreal, like the electron or the proton, in the sense that we no longer can talk about it like a ball of marble, which is going along a well-defined way. An electron is spread out. An electron is uncertain, and we are uncertain about its position and its momentum. And then think that sort of has led to a lot of what is called a probabilistic. So probability at a very fundamental level has entered into the jargon of science, in the jargon of physics in particular. And of course we do still make predictions, because we make them on an aggregate, on a large number of particles. We can predict that in the end this will happen, but we can't talk about individual particles doing this or that. That's the problem at the quantum mechanics, at the very fundamental level. Similarly, as you know, the relativity just has mind-blowing, concepts and ideas which have been tested. Even black holes have been discovered now, gravitational waves have been discovered, and now there are thoughts about what happens if we fall into a wormhole. Do we exit into a entirely new part of the universe, an entirely new time? So obviously, as you pointed out, the highly imagination is really, is given incentive by such provocative, you could say, ideas. So in that sense, definitely science, the way of thinking of science, a multi-universe idea. We do not know at this point in time whether the Big Bang actually is the point where everything started, initiated. There may have been a universe before that which contracted to a point and became the source of this Big Bang, and again our universe. We do not know at this point whether only one universe was created. How do we know? How can we say? So these are highly imaginative, imagination feeding ideas. So that's why you can see that a lot of people are writing about science for the lay public. People like Stephen Hawking, for example, has written, Dawkins in his own way has written, Gamow in an earlier time, and nowadays Green, so on and so forth. And they are trying to simplify these ideas, but people find them fascinating. I'm not saying artists in general, I'm talking about people in general. What is more important, I think, as a Snow discussion we had, is that as public, the lay public should be able to appreciate the ideas, and of course the artist is a part of the public. And so I would say in that sense there is a growing realization in the arts, on the art side, that we need to be aware of what is happening in science, at least in the broader sense. Of course an artist cannot penetrate into that level of mathematical or conceptual understanding, which is only for the trained mind in science. But the big ideas definitely should be and are being appreciated.
Well, on a lighter note, I would say we have discussed differences between artists and scientists, and now we have seen that they are also merging into some areas like imagination, which is becoming central point of both artists and scientists. I also think that they have monopolized the truth, because John Keats says that truth is beauty and beauty is truth. So who would define what is beauty and what is truth? And Einstein says that for an equation to be true, it has to be beautiful. So who would define beautiful? So don't you find interesting, and if you have some comments on that?
Absolutely. I mean, our scientists like Einstein, as you mentioned, or Dirac, I could mention, they often use the word, beautiful. Hermann Weyl, for example, there's a very interesting quote I can refer to you. Hermann Weyl, the mathematician, that he said that I always try to have both the accuracy and the mathematical rigor, as well as the beauty, to guide me in formulating my theory or my idea. But in his work, he says that if I would make a choice between the rigor and the beauty, I would go for the beauty. And similarly, as you mentioned, Einstein's famous quote that the equation has to be beautiful, or Dirac it was insistent that it can't miss, that equation is too ugly, it can't be the truth. So but that's and there are others who would take an issue with that. And Green, for example, makes it very clear that the issue is not aesthetic in the truth in the sense of science or the beauty of the, you can call it beautiful, but in the end it has to conform to the experiment, it has to conform to the observation, then it's the truth for the scientist. It's not just because something is beautifully articulated. But I mean, what can you say? At some point in time you might find something to be completely just a an aesthetically nice mathematically, but it takes centuries sometime for it to come out that this is something which is profoundly a part of the structure of nature. I mean, look at Einstein's general relativity. It has its roots in Riemann's work, I don't know, 150 or more years earlier. He was working only as a mathematical concept, and it's a beautiful mathematical concept. He was saying that let's imagine geometry in a curved space-time. Unlike normal geometry is in a flat space. This is like a table, and I can draw a triangle on it or a straight line on it, and that's the whole of the geometry. So this guy was given this task by his PhD in his work. Imagine geometry in a curved space. And it's a fascinating idea, but it had no use for a couple of 100 years probably. Now when you talk about general relativity and you talk about curved space-time, it all becomes very, very relevant. So I mean, what was just beautiful at that time or aesthetically became very, very important mathematically and physically a couple of 100 years later. So
very interesting. I would like to raise another point. You are a novelist as well, and
an aspiring novelist, you could say.
But you are. You have been writing short stories, and so fiction is your area. Milan Kundera says that novels' only function is to discover hidden aspects of human existence. So with different devices, of course not that much scientific, they illuminate hidden aspects of human existence. So discovery is one thing which he, according to famous novelist Milan Kundera, is one thing that artist must strive for when he is writing novels especially. And discovery is also scientists aspire. So this is also common area which you can say that artist and science are thinking in a somewhat similar manner. Of course they have different tools, they have different imaginations, they have to show things differently, but the anxiety to know and anxiety to discover, that is something common between scientist and artist. Would you like to say something else?
Absolutely. With the anxiety to create is of course common. I mean, creativity is an act full of anxiety in a way, of intention. The tension between what there is and what you want there to be, something which is created. When you create something, it's not existent at that point. But obviously you don't create in a vacuum. You create from the stuff that has come before you, preceded you. Whether as a scientist or as an artist, obviously your raw material is not only just the society or the data that you have, but obviously the concepts that have been built up before you. Even when you want to break the concept has to be there to be broken. Even if you want to break the style or technique of the art, it has to be there to be broken. So obviously, as you point out, the tension between of the creative act is very common, whether it's the science or the arts, and obviously the desire to find out. So the difference basically is that in the case of the artist, it is more a desire to express, It is more a desire to be able to communicate what the artist himself has seen or visualized or understood in the sense of understanding in terms of arts. And that's his expression is a very important part, in fact the most important part, what some would say. In the case of the scientist, the expression is not the primary thing, it is the ability to get to the substance of the matter, and then you could express it in a less beautiful term in Einstein's using a terminology, or you could express it in very eloquent formalism, mathematically or descriptively. So I mean that's obviously the difference, that for the scientist it is an act of discovery which is highly important. But I think for the artist it is not so much the act of discovery, it is basically the art of the expression. You could have the absolutely deep insight into human motivations and human aspiration or human connection. You could as an artist, but if you can't express it appropriately, that doesn't have any meaning then as an artistic creation. Whereas for the scientist, if he's understood the concept and if he's got it right, then obviously the expression in terms, well, you could argue that for a mathematician, for a physicist for example, you've got to be able to express it correctly in terms of the equation or the theory. So I guess the expression of course is highly important there. But for example Einstein, his genius basically is very much in his intuition, his ability to sense the physical idea. Then he was not a great mathematician in that sense, he had to seek help from people and he had to struggle very hard to formulate it in the way that he did. But there his intuition, in that sense he was more like an artist, he had a very strong intuitive sense. So anyway, that's my understanding of this.
Can we just come to some practical issues? Could there be some alternative culture to communicate directly with public which can take care of both scientific and artist or humanities perspectives? And does it apply an education system as well, which should not compartmentalize between these two cultures or disciplines or worldviews, and there should be some kind of holistic understanding of issues about our universe, about various other things which relate to our life?
Well, in a sense, I think I did mention a part of address part of your question earlier, that obviously there are now many people who are many experts who are well trained in science, but they're also very good communicators, and they are Carl Sagan for example, you can remember as a person, so many others like him who are putting forth the ideas of science and physics, most difficult ideas, trying to simplify them. Some doing it in Hawking of course, we mentioned earlier, and Penrose, and not really a public communicator, but for slightly more, but they're addressing the issues which the public is interested in. For example, Penrose is talking about consciousness. What is human consciousness and how does it relate to the machine, I mean the computer and its intellect and its its ability to, can the machine ever, computer ever be able to have consciousness, for example, questions like that. So and so biologists similarly, many of them I don't read much, but I know that there are many biologists who are also communicating very much with the public. So this third culture, as you said, this third culture is now very much a reality, and then people, these books often go on the bestseller list for months. They are, for example, A Brief History of Time from Hawking was on the bestseller list for many months. So that is there, I think. The other thing you mentioned, if I may go on.
Yeah.
Okay, was how the education system can cater to this and build a bridge, so to speak, between these two cultures. And I think is now very much there, particularly in the American system. I had the chance of being there for about 8 years, so I've seen it from close quarters. That obviously they have a very broad-based undergraduate education system. You've got to take some courses in social sciences. You've got to take some courses. If you're in science major, you have to take courses outside of your domain. And I mean, if you're a physics major, you've got to take some courses, biology, some courses in economics or psychology or things like that. So that is, of course, one way definitely where in the previous eras, in the 20th century, we could say, till 1960s or 70s, this was unknown. People are very, after high school, they were very, compartmentalized very strictly. That is no longer there, and in fact, even now even the scientists across the disciplines are interacting. They have to interact now. There are things which are highly cross-disciplinary.
If you see, social sciences deal with subjects like law, social justice, equality, and other values, whereas science does a lot of discoveries which are which which people can benefit from, but they generally do not deal with these things like justice and equality. And when it is translated into technology, it's so fast that a stage comes that technology determines the shape of your society. It dictates what kind of societies should be. As Aldous Huxley had pointed out in his famous work,
Brave New World,
that autocratic subjugation of human beings by technology and stupor and comfort created by technology. So there is a need that social sciences should dictate how technology should serve humanity, rather than technology should dictate how human society should be, because there are a lot of things which are happening now, like environmental degradation, like machine is now creating. Like ChatGPT is doing something. So what's your take on that?
Oh, I fully share the sentiment that we cannot allow this obsessive indulgence in technology and consumerism to to dictate the shape of society and create not only deprive people, unsettle people, dislodge people, make societies as totally unsettled in the sense of, because it's very easy to, as you said, technological changes now, particularly in the West, are taking place very rapidly. And there, at least because their discoveries are made over there, the societies do come to some kind of equilibrium with those changes, because they're a part of their creative process and their lived process. In third world countries like ours, who are basically importers and consumers of technology, it's a big issue, because you simply haven't gone through the process of the change. It comes in and it sort of wreaks havoc with your traditional patterns of living. And I'm not saying that all traditional patterns should be preserved ad infinitum. I'm not saying that. But there is a natural rhythm of a society, and a natural rhythm which changes at its own pace. Maybe sometimes it has to go faster. But technology imposes its own rhythm and its own dictate on society, and that is creating havoc all over these countries which are backward in terms of the effort to create technology. And I think a lot of this has to do not because these changes are really required in these technological changes I'll give you a simple example. I mean, every year you have a new variety of mobile phone which is making it almost seem like you cannot live without this particular brand or your particular upgradation in your why. I mean, just because you can store more pictures or videos in your mobile, or that you can communicate even faster than you could earlier. And for that, I mean, we are changing our life patterns. Our socialization is being affected. Our ability to communicate with each other is being affected. We become obsessed with the fact that we as an individual can have the entire world in our hand and we can just relate to whatever we want to and shut off what we don't want to relate to. And this is not a positive development in my way of looking at it.
Okay. Very interesting, but now we are left with very short time. So I have two choices. Either I should ask you to tell us your creative process and how your scientific background influences your creative process, or I should request you to recite some poetry for us.
Well, and let me just answer your question in one line or two lines. That is, you know, the way as a scientist you rationalize things. So maybe that's the reason that I am more of a, I write in Urdu, you know. So and there are two traditions in Urdu, the ghazal and the nazm. So I'm much more of a nazm person because I want the continuity of thought to be there. And I want to take my reader on to some kind, I wouldn't say logical end, but like some kind of an end where I leave it to them, of course, to decide various things, various options. But maybe that's the strongest I can say. I've written a few things which are having a theme which you could say are inspired by science, but that's not a general thing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khurshid, for coming here and giving such a nice talk. So viewers, thank you for watching us. See you next Sunday, same time. Take care.